All right, now, in one of my favorite exercises in futility. I should button this one, huh? Just noticed. Over here, there we go. There we go, now I look totally proper. Always trying to look good, don't I? Not. Okay, so let's see if this is working, including the Gary video. So you're going to hear me listening to this stream. Not. Okay, so let's see if this is working, including the Gary. Okay.
Alright, another draft physics type video. This will be regarding, I suppose, just because it's
Okay,
sort of annoying.
so let's see if this is working.
I try not to be obnoxious about it, but man, it's just so tedious. The false accusations made, it's just the arrogance of these people. They have a very weakly evidenced theory, and they're just dogmatic.
So, whatever. Okay.
Draft physics type video. This will be regarding, I suppose, just because it's sort of annoying. I try not to be obnoxious about it, but man, it's just so tedious. The false accusations made.
Yeah, I doubt that'll work. I specifically didn't mention you in this video so you couldn't say I was lying about you, but of course you still have already started false accusations. No promises to make it very far into this.
It's just the arrogance of these people. They have a very weakly evidenced theory.
All right, first of all, you're arrogant as fuck, and your authority is just your own common sense. All right, so I will take my common sense and the common sense of 400 years of science over that, but that's not really what we're supposed to be debating. And it's not weakly evidenced. It lasted 400 years being tested more and more, right down to the point where it's like, look, we got some modern science, 20th century starting, we can find that absolute reference frame. What about what light looking like a wave has to be going through a medium? And frankly, empty space with no fields would still be a medium, right? It would be a phenomena that had to be explained. The fact that things can exist in space is why we talk about things like fields and whatnot. But it's not that we, are saying we understand it fully. We're working on what it is. But when you say relativity of velocity is poorly evidenced, you're just making that shit up. There's 400 years. You think 400 years of scientists have just been like in a poetry group, which poetry they liked? I mean, you're on the fucking internet. That is the result of them getting it right.
And they're just dogmatically stating that you're crazy.
You're dogmatically stating that everyone else besides you is crazy to accept these facts that we've seen through experiments that are repeated and repeatable and get repeated.
Or you're somehow violated rational decency.
You know what? I've never said that, so why don't you talk about why you need to make this accusation? Do you have a real point to make, or do you just have to play the victim? You said some pretty terrible things about me, right, Gary? But I'm not here going, and that's what it's all about. Everything Gary believes is wrapped up in the fact that Gary as an individual is also an asshole. No, I don't do that because that would be pathetic.
By not accepting their, I would argue, extraordinary explanation. And that's what these are, in my opinion. They're the opposite of the Occam's razor.
Well, the thing is, I've always wanted people to think more about how weird Galileo's 400-year-old velocity relativity was. Once I heard about it, did think that, and it seemed very strange to me. But studying the history of science, the plot thickens, and it gets to a point where not only was there this odd thing floating out there that was useful, Einstein cemented it that it really was true, and that's why it's called relativity, because it's emphasizing this 400-year-old idea actually has a fundamental reality. How do we know that? Well, we're not necessarily getting every detail correct, but we know that because you come up with ideas based on that, and then you build something that would have to work a certain way if you're correct, and then it works that way. Or you build something that would have to work a certain way if you're correct, for example, about there being a stationary reference ether, And you get a negative result proving that that can't be the way the world works. And there's 400 years of this, thousands and thousands of people in countries all over the world, communists, capitalists, fascists, all over the world. And you think there's some big cabal that scientists like to be woo-woo people. Well, no, really, they liked being Newtonian and Archimedean and saying, hey, give me a lever, I'll move the world. Tell me the positions and velocity of everything, and I'll tell you the future. They were very resistant to accept this fundamental reality of relativity. But because they have an agreed upon way of demonstrating reality to each other, known as experimental evidence, eventually the people left, 90% of them, had to accept the results could not be classical. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to accept, or that 10% left is accepting the models presented that are conform more to the data. Maybe there's yet another model that conforms even better to the data. But it's not going to go back and establish an ether. It's not going to go back and establish that some idea that you could catch up to a photon of light. Light always shoots away from you at a particular speed. It is a weird thing. And the only reason we believe it is because it has been evidenced.
Principle. Go for the most bizarre explanation rather than the simplest explanation. So, we're on the subject of time dilation.
Well, you could go to even Wikipedia and look at length contraction, the mass distortions. You could look at they have the section of experimental evidence. So you could search for experimental evidence, site.edu. And there is experimental evidence of all of those things, right? You refuse to accept it because to you, the universe has to make common sense to you. And I say that only the universe that you have evolved to understand makes that kind of common sense. The fundamentals of the universe make whatever kind of sense they're going to make. And if our brain can't handle it, or we have to learn something, or even evolve a new organ for the brain, then none of that will change how the reality is. Reality does not have to be common sense. And unless you believe in God, there's no smart reason to think that it does. And your idea, the ideas that you presented, are both not common sense and also obviously are not creating the mathematical system that matches the experimental evidence, right? Because the math that matches experimental evidence has things like mass distorted. It has different particles than you present. When they're calculating what's happening to particles and inside particles, it's all based on different particles and the idea that these other aspects of physics are true. You have different, there's no way your particles can just be plugged in as though they were, quarks, right? And they work this totally different way from quarks, but you think you can plug them into the mathematics that defines how the quarks behave, and it's going to come out the same? That's ridiculous. It's impossible that anybody that's gone to grammar school doesn't have enough math to know that if you have a different number of apples and you're adding them a different way, and that the results won't be the same to that other way that you're different from. It's like, the universe is a sack of 100 apples. No, it's a sack of 10 apples. It's like, well, we counted the apples and it's 100. Well, you'll get 100 when you count mine too. But you just said there were 10. Liar, stop lying about my position.
Violation, essentially. And first, this recontextualization of Galileo, who just made a simple statement, just made from observation, that observationally, you can't tell what's moving in moving frames. It's the same difference. If I'm going 70 miles an hour and you're going 30 miles an hour the opposite way, it really doesn't matter whether I'm going 30 miles an hour and you're going 70 miles an hour. We can't see it any other way than 100 miles an hour. That's what it's going to look like when you add the two up.
Except there was an idea that you could tell who was moving by measuring your speed relative to the speed of light, right? And if the speed of light is 70 miles an hour faster in this direction than it is in that direction, then you're probably moving 45 miles an hour in the given direction. And that failed. And it was tried plenty of times. And you can't do that. Light is always traveling away from you at light speed. Oh, I'm sorry, it blows your mind. That doesn't mean it's impossible thought. There certainly can't be anything in this universe that would blow Gary's mind. Everything makes sense to Gary. Right? Isn't that what you're arguing?
The product is going to be what we both see. We're going to both see.
Okay, I got to let him go for a little while.
Simple statement. It wasn't drawing any conclusions about anything bent or warped or any of that crap. Just the fact that the observer can't tell. That's it.
Right. That's the story I told. The observer can't tell, and then that has been verified and verified and verified right up to the point where Einstein realized, but that if that's really true, then time and space would have to bend. Otherwise, you would be able to tell. And then we measured if time and space bends, and it does. And you go, but it was because of a broken clock. I don't care if you call the clock that's going fast broken. When it lands, it's not broken anymore, so it fixed itself. And the math of the warp is exactly right. So I'm going with the guy that came up with that unbelievable thing, showed that it matches experiments that we can do to look into it. And that evidence beats your intuition.
That once he's moving with something,
okay, I can let him go for a bit.
Of acceleration, velocity is what it is, and people knew that from being on boats and trains and lots of mechanical devices. I didn't have trains back then, but yeah, you get the idea. So anyway, that acceleration gave it away. But once you had velocity, it was hard to tell you did unless there was something vibrating, something accelerating and deaccelerating. Anyway,
is the guy that changed their frame. The person that changed your frame, that's...
Okay, so again, he's talking about these frames, and again, the only correlation that we know exists is the correlation between the function of matter, whether we're talking about radioactive decay...
He's being so polite.
Other types of metabolism of matter, I don't know what those might be. Even if I was to make a time clock, as I've stated before, if you try to put a time clock in a moving thing, the problem is if you're moving fast enough, your time clock won't even work, because the mirror you're going to bounce the photon off of is going to be moving away almost as fast as the photon is going across, and it won't hit the mirror anymore. And then your receiver won't receive the photon because the photon's going to land back there. So you have to put the receiver in a location that's distant from the emitter, which breaks your clock.
No, it doesn't. Not in Galilean relativity, because if you're not under acceleration, when you shoot the photon down, it doesn't. If you're going really, really fast and you start the photon clock, so it's bouncing back and forth between those mirrors, if you don't accelerate or decelerate, it's going to bounce up and down. To someone else, this is Einstein's famous thought experiment. To somebody else shooting along, it looks like it's doing, a zigzag up and down because the mirrors are moving relative to that other person.
All right. So let me...
The one that'll end up having had slower time.
Again, it has nothing to do with moving frames. It has to do with frames actually at velocity. So you have to be at a velocity, quote unquote, to have this effect.
The elements of this are confirmed.
And Gary, ever since Galileo, velocity is relative. So everybody is at velocity relative to something else, right? Relative to something else in the universe, you're at motion, and all of those things are the things that are in motion relative to you.
Experiments that show there is time dilation.
Well, no one's arguing that there isn't effects. Again, so he says it's time dilation in the sense that I will establish that anything that changes the emission of a radioactive, some radioactivity, the decay of an atom, anything that changes the decay of the atom is a change in its time. It can't change decay. So if you heated it and it decayed quicker, or you hit it with more neutrons and it decayed quicker, it's really, you've changed time. Because anything that changes how fast an isotope decays is automatically dilating time.
No, it's time because it slows every physical process, every single process. You call things broken, but if there's an astronaut in the ship with the clock, nothing else is getting broken. And when you land the ship, everything is totally in working order. Everything weighs the same. It was not broken by any ordinary means. And you should say, why does slowing down fix it if you want to argue that, because it seems to me you're just using words like broken that convey that you think this explanation is broken. It's not really that the clock is broken, it's working perfectly well. And if you have 100 clocks, and one clock is the speed of a chemical reaction, and another clock is a photon bouncing around in a chamber, and another clock is the atomic clocks that they use this for, and another clock is the reaction of hydrogen to oxygen, and they all slow down at exactly the same speed. Now, granted, since time thus looks morphable in this way, we're going to find, this is why physicists expect that time isn't going to be some esoteric fantasy number from the metaphysical realm. It's going to have some sort of quantum field, or it's going to be the result of, like you say, it's going to be the result of photons interacting. When a photon hits something, you get a tick in time or whatever. Or there's a particle of time or something, though I can't imagine how that exactly works. But it's kind of like this. The best I have to understanding how open-minded we have to be about what time turns out to be is if well, this is the example I've always thought about. It's a different issue, but it's similar, I think, in terms of how open-minded we have to be about time. It's like, let's say that time we see just flowing steadily forward, right? What if sometimes it just flowed back? Maybe if time is drifting around like this. We wouldn't know that, it occurred to me, right? Because it's probably better for you guys this way. So time's going along, and our thoughts are forming, chemistry's happening, neurons are firing. Oh, and then time starts to go backward. Well, that wheel now is going backwards. The electrical impulses, electrical impulses that were going forward, they're now unrolling. They're going backwards. The memories that we're forming through our chemical processes in the brain, whatever they are, they're going backwards, right? Time going backwards just means that all the physics that we have goes backward. And the way the math works out, it's actually fine with physics that time might go backward. And we wouldn't know because time's, drifted back to here, and we've unremembered everything over here. We've forgotten it. We've unremembered it because we didn't even forget it. It was actually our brain moved backwards, and we unraveled all those memories. And now here we are going forward again. And it's just like a piece of film. You can look at it the other way and see things, run it backwards and whatnot. But the things in the film, it just has this forward character, right? We go back and then start going forward. And we'd think once we got back there that we wouldn't know that an hour ago we were in the future. We would think that an hour ago we were in the past. And then boom, recontinuity. And even if things could change, would go in different paths, we would have this sense of continuity, right? So there's a lot of tricks that time could play on us. So time could just be a physical process. Like maybe it is possible that there's certain chemistry where they form their memories in the reverse order of time. We'd see them living their lives backwards, and they would be experiencing it forwards in their own direction. I don't know. I'm not saying that is the case. I'm saying we have to be pretty open-minded about time.
Because all you have as evidence is a correlation between velocity and a delay in decay. Nothing else.
Yeah, it's a delay in absolutely every physical process. So not just decay, but in every process.
Someone can deny it.
Plus, the distortions have also been studied through length contraction and mass distortion.
Who's denying it? So again, it's this false accusation that somehow the evidence has been denied. What evidence do we have?
You said that there was no evidence for the relativity of motion, that it's weakly evidenced. There's actually 400 years of thousands of people in every culture on Earth producing this evidence. So that's what I'm saying you're denying.
Muons flying through the atmosphere.
So you get confused. Now you're talking about the time distortion, but this video is really about the history of that. You're not just denying the part where Einstein says, hey, if Galileo's right, then this other weird shit has to be true. We checked and it was true. You're not just disagreeing with that. You're disagreeing with Galileo's concept that the velocity is truly relative. And you're saying that if you're going half the speed of light and shine a flashlight in front of you, that light's going to move away at half the speed of light. And that's not what happens.
When they're hit by cosmic rays and they're accelerated to high speeds and they decay slower. So there's a correlation between velocity.
Right, that's one example that you deny, and there's all the other examples that triangulate on the reality that you also deny. And plus, we're talking about going back 400 years and you denying the Galilean reality that all of Newton's stuff is based on. So you're basically rejecting all of science, not just modern science, you're rejecting all science as woo-woo modern. Even guys 400 years ago, you're saying they wanted there to be no center of the universe and they wanted relativity, and so then they've lied to us for 400 years about it. It's as insane as Trump.
And slower radioactive decay. We have experiments with atomic clocks put in airplanes and driven around the Earth, and we have a little bit of decay, change. So there's a correlation strictly between velocity and the rate of decay. What evidence am I denying in saying I can explain that with some other reason than it went into a time well?
Because you haven't explained it, right? And there's velocity and also what goes on in accelerated frames, which gravitational frames are. And you can explain that if you want with some alternate system. But what you can't do is say, hey, I'll take the current math that works. I'm going to change all of the variables in the equations, and just believe me, it's going to work out the same. If you change the variables in the equations, if you take out mass distortion and put in blue fish, the equations are not going to turn out the same. Very unlikely. So that's on you to prove that. But you're calling people fucktards because they go, wait a second, here's what you'd have to, here's some issues. And you go, fucktard, you're just a liar. You're just like 400 years of scientists just making shit up. Yeah, well, I don't have that impression that 400 years of science has been the element of humanity that just made shit up. Okay, it happens sometimes. People go, what about that cold fusion? You mean the thing that, a few weeks later, the rest of the scientific world was like, nuh-uh. What about the arsenic life forms? You mean the thing that 3 days later, the rest of science was like, nuh-uh. That's how science works. There's enough freedom to try and claim and make reports and even get peer-reviewed because you seem to follow all the rules and, of carefulness and whatnot. And it doesn't get picked up. It's proved that nobody else can reproduce the cold fusion, so nope. And people are like, they hear a study came out and it's like, oh, this is the new truth. No, that's not how it works. It takes 5-10 years before a legitimate new truth is actually confirmed. I mean, when my grandmother was dying of Alzheimer's, I watched the Alzheimer's news really close. And believe me, they've cured Alzheimer's 20 times, but that didn't pan out. And they've cured it 100 times in rats, but not in humans. And if you just believed the first start, you'd think it was already cured 20 years ago. But it's not, because you have to wait and see. Because science is about checking up on these ideas. And they don't even get to make those claims really until they have an experiment, and then even the experiments, they have to be redone more than once. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. You're not trying to do any of that shit.
It fell into a time warp, and time actually slowed down. But it wasn't ticking in the rest of the universe at exactly the same rate.
Well, I'm really glad that after 10 years we could catch up to what the argument should have fucking started out as. Yeah, that is Einstein's position for which he was held to be a genius because it all panned out in laboratories. So sorry that happened to you emotionally.
That it somehow is cheating time.
But you can also accept the reality. The fact that denial is possible.
So again, another accusation. Just keep saying it, and
No, it's not an accusation. We say, and I know there is 400 years of evidence for the relativity of velocity, and there's 100 years of evidence for the relativity of space-time, whatever it turns out to be, the relativity being the distortions that are predicted in time and mass and length that we've checked. There's 100 years of that and 400 years of the other. And you're saying it's weakly evidence. And you say they never did the two slits. They've never shot light through one slit. Right? And that's what you're in denial about. It's not accusation. It is a statement on the fact that you admit that you don't accept that that's happened. You don't think they've done those experiments for 400 years. Nobody's checked the last 100 years. They just liked the idea so much, they assumed it, and then they started building computer manufacturing plants based on engineering derived from it. But it's not true. That doesn't seem credible to many of us. Okay, so I'm calling it denial. It's not an accusation. You reject all of those experiments happened. And since I know they did happen, from my point of view, relative to my perspective, that amounts to denial, because the fact that those experiments have happened is available to you. They have not all been translated into books on tape or made into videos on YouTube. But you can read 400 years of scientific literature if you want. And you can just pick out the experiments that were done. But you cherry pick things that you would like to, like maybe they did lie or fudge the evidence on the original. I don't think so, but on the original, it was a very difficult experiment and they were off in the cold. Who knows how it really went? Maybe they lied about the relativity with that eclipse. On the other hand, they've checked 100 other ways. They build something like GPS, and if they don't take those effects into account of the time dilation properties of a gravity well and the relative velocities, that the thing won't work. To tune it, you have to take that into account. That is evidence that they've gotten the math right. Now, what would the interpretation be? Your interpretation is that a perfectly functional satellite's actually broken. You use the word broken. We use the word distortion because it seems to be in functional order. It's just that it's operating slower. So we don't call that broken, but it's the same thing that you and us are talking about. You say, when the universe is not behaving the way I like, it's broken. That's all. It doesn't happen because it's broken then. When it happens, it's not happening because it's broken. How the universe works when it's working, well, we say the universe is always working. There is no law of physics of when something's broken. When you smash the hammer down and the handle breaks off, oh, it's broken. To you, it's broken. The universe doesn't give a fuck. It followed the laws of physics. They were working perfectly well. The only sense it was broken comes from you wanted it to keep being a useful hammer. Well, you want an atomic clock in space to be a useful clock. Guess what it is? You just have to take into account that the rate of that clock and everything going on that moving platform the clock's on is slowed down. A human's metabolism. Every element of time. It's ridiculous, really.
So instead of saying there's alternative ways to explain it, and you don't have to be insane or crazy or unreasonable to say all we have is a correlation between a material change, that is, the matter changes associated with velocity. And because you have...
It's not all we have. What we have is the exact correlation, the exact amount of change. We can calculate it. Now, maybe we could calculate a new modified formula. We'd calculate it even better. But we can calculate that. So we don't just have, hey, something goes on, something else happens. No, we actually have, it'll be 2.3% more of this, and this will be distorted like that, and that means this will last that long, and all that works out. So we have a lot more than just, well, there's a a line that goes up and down. And anything I describe that goes up and down is good enough. No, we have the exact fucking... That's why I'm telling you the mathematics is important. You don't even need to use current mathematics, but you need a mathematical or a diagram or something that could be used to make a calculation where you put the numbers of your experiment starting position in, and that calculation gives you the answer you expect to see. Then you turn the motherfucking experiment on and you see... Did I see that?
Of an association between a change in the function of matter and velocity, you're saying the time around that thing, or whatever that thing was in, the universe's clock ticks slower for it. And it...
No. I'm saying there is no universe's clock, obviously. The time is localized. So time is something that's going on in the area you're in. Time's also going on in another area. If they have a relative velocity, or they're in different gravitational situations, or they're under different kinds of acceleration, then time changes for them. Time is localized. Time is relative. That's Einstein's theory. There is no universal clock going slower because the time at every place is not independent, mind you. It's related. It's related by distance and locality. It's related by the relationships. Whether there's a velocity, whether there's gravity. So there is no universe clock. That's the point, is relativity answers that there is no universal clock. There's no universal origin point. There's no universal rest frame. That's the claim. And I'm not making it. It was made 100 years ago. Okay, but it does follow from Galileo's relativity of velocity, which was made 400 years ago. But they had a lot of basics to work on before they could even get to Newton. And then Newton gave them a lot of useful, fun toys to play with so that they kept working with that. And then Einstein came along and said, wait, if this is true, and and there is no ether that we're ever moving through, then that means space and time would distort. Mass would have to distort. And then we checked, and it turns out it does. And at that point, it doesn't matter if you say it wasn't distorting, it was broken. Okay, we could call it mass breaking. But I think distortion and dilation, warping, these are better words since it comes back, right? If I stretch a rubber band, I say, look, this rubber band's now longer. And you say, no, it's broken. And I bring it back together. And I'm like, look, it's not broken. It's just a thing that I can stretch and snap, then it's broken. You misuse words, which is a kind of a lie, really.
That's somehow real. That it's not just a consequence of a breakdown in its normal function. That it doesn't function normally at velocity. That's not a reasonable explanation.
Because it does function normally. The only thing that's happened is it's slowed down. That's sort of the point.
Doesn't mean that you can't also accept reality.
So yes, I have to accept your explanation. That's all you're saying. Your explanation is now declared reality, and anyone who doesn't accept your explanation of a time well is somehow a reality denier.
So I don't understand why people just are so hypocritical. This is not just Gary, but that's what you're telling us, Gary. You're telling us that you say we're lying, that there are experiments have been done, right? And that we're totally wrong and don't get how the universe works. So why are you pointing the finger about it? It was like when you pointed at Theoria and was like, do you know how stupid it makes you look when you just call Einstein and them fat retard heads and stupid, stupid, stupid? And that's what you do 90% of the time. Including that there's only a couple people here willing to discuss this physics with you. You got thousands of viewers, right? Subscribers. Get one of them to fucking talk to you. Heithl and I are like the only two people that'll talk to you about it. And we're just lying bastards. I don't have to discredit your crazy idea. It's not going anywhere.
I mean, it's just bullshit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I wish more people realized that things started to get weird 400 years ago, except for nobody really took it literally. Like, the weird part of it was like, this is the way.
Well, again, I don't think it got weird. It's not weird to realize that you add velocities. Just
No, Gary, you say that there is a universal reference frame, that something is at rest or not at rest. Galileo said, no, there isn't. He didn't say, we haven't found the absolute reference frame. He said, there isn't one. Right? You are disagreeing with Galileo on how velocity works. Galileo did not foresee that this relativity would mean that there wouldn't be an absolute time reference frame. Didn't even occur to him. Nobody even questioned the possibility of that for centuries. But his belief that it was true of velocity, and velocity is distance over time, ends up impacting time. If there was an absolute reference frame that you could refer to, right, then you wouldn't need time distortion and you wouldn't see those kinds of effects.
it's like you subtract them. There's nothing weird about realizing that if I'm on a train going 60 miles an hour and I throw a baseball 60 miles an hour in front of me, that the baseball will hit somebody on the ground at 120 miles an hour. That isn't strange. And that's all Galileo was saying. Velocity.
No, that isn't all that he said. Again, you don't care about the truth.
These combine.
We look at it, and it was very, very successful. And then Einstein came along and said, wait, there's some weird ramifications of this. And those ramifications turned out to be reality.
Well, see, again, it turned out to be reality. And their evidence is what? What evidence besides a correlation between velocity and a change in material function do you have?
Just look up experimental evidence for length contraction, all right? Because I've already answered these questions, and fuck you for making me run around trying to tell you things that you don't want to hear, right? You look it up. It's not me. It's not my lab that did it. It's 100 years of tests about general relativity. And you know some of them and you reject them all. Oh, the decay time is just this and the kinder is just that. Well, guess what? All of their explanations all tie together. None of their explanations contradict another one. They all work together. If you ever get to that point and then somebody makes a mathematics for you, it's not going to be the same as the current mathematics. But if it gets the same answers, then great. It's a legitimate alternate way of looking at it. And you can use your alternate facts.
Where do you have any evidence beyond that? Beyond that being the thing that exists as the evidence. All we have as evidence is there's a relationship between velocity and certain material functions. And they're very specific material functions. If I put a...
No, they are not specific material functions. They are every physical process. Every physical process. Everything in that spaceship holding that clock, and any astronauts in there, you're trying to boil tea, everything else works at this clock rate, this local clock rate. Inside there, people see the time is totally normal, but when they land, we could see that the clocks diverged.
I mean, there's different timepieces, right? So if I take a one of those sand hourglass, and I stick an hourglass and grab out to, let's say, I don't know, 20,000 miles away from the Earth in an orbit of some kind. Just stick it out there. Now, it's going to tell time really, really slow. I mean, the sand is barely going to go pushing through the thing because there's so little gravity. Just a little bit of sand will fall through, a little bit. And it'll seem like, well, time is really, really slow. Now, by theory...
Oh, if they had put an hourglass on there, I would say, because an hourglass is also susceptible to the acceleration and all kinds of things. So that would be a bad kind of timepiece. But see, you're already explaining we would have alternate explanations of why that behaved different in space. Why a timepiece that needs gravity in a low gravity situation would work differently. It doesn't explain why everything in the whole fucking spaceship is also slowed down the exact matching amount.
Should I conclude that time is slower there? That in reality it's a time warp and that's the real time there? Or should I know that that's just a phenomenon based on the fact that there's no gravity pulling the sand through the glass anymore?
No, see, the thing is, if you had this, everybody on the ship would be going, this clock is running slower. This hourglass is running slower in 0G. In fact, nothing's going through. But that's not what happens. Everybody looks at the clock. Everybody on the spaceship with the atomic clock looks at the clock, and it looks like, yep, 1001. Yeah, it's counting seconds.
More. It's just a consequence of the change in its position. It's change in its function based on the forces affecting it. And that when you have velocity, there's forces affecting you.
No, and that's, I guess, yet another thing you deny about Galileo's version of this. If you are in an inertial reference frame, then the forces aren't affecting you, because a force affecting you puts you into an accelerated reference frame, a non-inertial reference frame for some period of time.
So overturning that is overturning 400 years of science.
Okay, so another bold statement. You're denying Galileo.
So if I'm in a spaceship, if I'm an ant living on the Voyager spacecraft and I'm moving, I don't know how many thousand miles an hour now, way out in deep space, right? There is no forces affecting me. I'm out of fuel. I'm going at a constant velocity. There is no forces. It's not like, oh, at that speed, it's about to break up, Jim. No, it does not give a fuck unless it runs into something, has a collision with something that it has velocity relative to. Just on its own, it's just sitting in space like any other thing that's in an inertial reference frame. Going 0 miles an hour, going 1,000 miles an hour, they're both inertial reference frames, according to Galileo, which is a 400-year-old idea that has only been confirmed and reconfirmed and confirmed again over 400 years of religious people and priests, every kind of scientific detractor for 400 years, also playing the part of the game, never proving it wrong. Or I shouldn't say that, because when they do prove it wrong, what do we get? That we get a new system, and science goes on. Because if you prove science wrong, then science just goes, clump, okay, bored you. You're now part of science. Oh, Newton, I finally proved Newton's formula are wrong. I'm Einstein. Bloop. Okay, that's a part of science now. That's how that fucking shit works. You're just... I'm sad because it's made me realize a couple of things. One, you're in this entirely for, like, kind of recognition you have the most beautiful brain, even more beautiful than Barbara Bush. And two, that has led me to the realization that the reason you have so many subs is they like watching your pain. They like watching you in anguish. Right? They like watching you suffer on camera. They don't care about me, who I am, because I always was just thinking of the people that watch you, but they come and comment. And but I realized, well, most of the people that watch you don't come and watch me. They don't care that you're attacking me. They don't think, oh, I was watching that Piro dude, he needs to be taken down a notch. They don't watch me. They watch just you, and it doesn't matter whether it's me or Hythloday or Brett Keane. They could not give a shit. They just want to watch you in pain. Well, go to fucking bullshit. Fucking idiots, little lie to the foot cards, little micro penis, fat file. Well, that's what they want to see. And it's sad. Because I like some little kernel and some little part of your brain enough that I feel sorry the way that little person that is nice to cats, evidently not all of them, and frees a spider or whatever, takes a walk, even though he doesn't really want to leave his property or his land, takes a walk down to help pick up trash because it's fucking trash. I like that little Gary in there. And then your internet fame has become this thing where you are actually, you know how to be civil. And you are not being civil because you know your audience likes that. But what you haven't got is because when you're not civil, they feel like they're seeing your pain. they're sadists. Not all of them, of course. I mean, I'm in your audience, and that's not out of sadism. I just realized recently this is going on, and that you're playing to it.
Galileo, if you don't assume that Galileo really meant time dilation was a real thing. He really believed that it was...
See, fuck you. I didn't say that. I told the whole story of it, and Galileo did not even... They didn't think of time dilation. It was just velocity. Why would that... Who would possibly think that that meant that there has to be time dilation, velocity relativity? He believed in it. Who knows? If he'd been told, well, that means time will have to dilate, he might have given it up. Didn't happen, because 300 years later, a guy comes along and says, hey, wait a minute. I realized by thinking it would mean this. And it's kind of like you at that point, or any other science theory that says, I got a better way of looking at it. And the thing is, though, we then could go and check, and it was like, holy shit, and what gave. I mean, let's say you had this for 300 years, velocity is relative. Sure, why not? You could kind of tell that. You're in a boat, and you get the other boats going, and you feel like a rest, and they feel like rest because you talk to that guy afterwards. And so, yeah, it's just a common sense thing, not that hard to accept. And then somebody comes along, Einstein, 300 years later, and goes, wait a second. I thought this through. If that's really true, if there's no way to go ahead and find your absolute speed, that means time and space is going to have to contract. If that happened, if Galileo had realized that implication, there's a good chance he'd said to himself, okay, well, that can't be it then. That's, But 300 years of using that, and then this ramification, and people still said, yeah, don't think so. But they tested it. And that's what you're in denial about. Because, see, I have to say you're in denial because I'm going to keep pointing out they've tested it for 100 years. And you're going to keep saying, nope, they haven't got around to it yet. Well, I'm going to call that denial because they have. And no, I'm not going to put 100 years worth of videos, reading 100 years worth of experimental data, deciding which ones, were better and more easy for Gary to get. Fuck that. It's out there. You could go look at it yourself. You could go to school. You could do an online physics degree. Try that out. Oh, my God. We should do a GoFundMe to pay for Gary to get an online degree in physics where he would actually have to do the work. Because Gary even said in one of his videos recently, I don't want to do that work. Do it for me. I'm just here for the big picture, man. I'm like Ben Carson. I'm just a big picture guy. Doesn't have to make sense in reality. If doing the problems is important, that's where the nitty-gritty becomes apparent to you of what's really the problem you're trying to work out and solve. And you don't just go, hey, this is related to that, this certain way they say, but I say it's fish and it's arrows and blue and red. What's the difference? The difference is they've figured out the actual math that their claim to a relationship ends up in a successful prediction. So you have to get to that point. And you won't get to the point of reproducing our current math because your system's too different. There's no way that relates one-to-one mathematically. You need your own math that gets the same answers. And that's possible, right? Einstein's equations get the same answers as Newton's and all of the ordinary, earthbound, 200-year-old kind of railroads, ballistics, rocket ships. Einstein's makes the same answers, but it puts an extra thing in there to take account of the distortion, or that is the reason for the distortion. And you would have to do something like that. But you can't. Your system says the old equations, because the old equations have, factors next to mass, so the mass is getting dilated. You can't use those equations because you're saying the mass never gets dilated. You need alternate equations, but they need to have the same answers for all the cases we've ever checked. And any new cases we haven't checked, then they need to predict the right answers. That's what relativity did. That's what quantum mechanics did. And that's why we have two weird systems in terms of how do you interpret them dominating, because they predicted answers that were then checked for. And you go, nope, they weren't checked for. That's why I call that denial. Nope, they weren't checked for 100 years. Nope, they've just been playing around. They didn't ever check. They never checked. They just said, we like this idea. We're going to pretend to check, But everybody, you Russians, Chinese, Germans, Americans, French, South Americans, Guatemalans, Filipinos, scientists, everybody, look, don't get off the play script. Only pretend to do the experiments, then say we got the answers we wanted. Then build a brand new technology out of that lie. That's how stupid what you're saying is. And if you want to know who should be arrogant and who should be humble, somebody with an alternate way of looking at things should be a little bit humble about their disdain for mathematics and stuff, I think.
There's frames of time, and you could bend time. You could break the rules of time. I don't think so.
See, break the rules of time. The rules of time. Please remember, capitalize all of the letters in that. Capital T the, capital R rules, capital O of, capital T time, the rules of time. Are you going to tell me you're breaking the rules of time with your atomic clock? No. I'm saying you don't know what the rules of time are. Your little assumption from, your nursery school intuition is not the official rules of time. As a matter of fact, Einstein updated what the rules of time are. And the clock, the atomic clock, being sent at a high speed to test the theory of relativity and time distortion is not breaking the rules of time, Gary. It's following the rules of time. As a matter of fact, with the experiment, we sort of expect that when we run an experiment, the experiment is following the rules of nature. The sometimes called laws of nature, or what I would prefer to think of as the patterns that we have noticed are consistent in nature. And no, we're not saying the rules are getting broken, Gary. Ironically, since the experimental evidence exists and is what it is, and it doesn't conform to what you think the rules of time are, you're the one that says that the experiments are breaking the rules of time. Not us. We say that the rules of time got adjusted 100 years ago, and now the new rules of time, we haven't found anything that breaks them yet. When we find something that breaks them, good news, because that's an opportunity to update our rules of time again. Because we've been updating our rules of time, our rules of causality. We've been updating these for a long, long time. All right, so I'm about a little bit less than halfway through, maybe what you call 2/5. And I need a break from it. But Gary has been exceptionally polite, and so I find it, he's insulted me in these ways I don't care about, right? Mostly he's on the edge, but anyway, you know what I'm talking about. For Gary, he's been very polite, so, I think I might come back to this, but no promises. Maybe I won't. I'm going to take a break. This is part 1 of 1, maybe, but maybe part 1 of 2. You never know. And but if I do it, I'll probably do it sometime relatively soon later today. Now, before I cut out, I'm going to check for any comments. Oh, there's a few people in there. So I'll go backwards. Prince Polka says, "Hi, Thalide, are you here?" YP says, "Unsalvageable." Prince Polka says, "I would give $10. I'm reading them backward in time. YP says, "Give up on Gary." I said this was my favorite exercise in futility. I mean, it's a chance to talk about, some people want to teach basic science, and those are called teachers. And there's some crash course in chemistry type, wants to do that, and good for them. That's not what I like to do. I like to talk about science and philosophy of science, though, and philosophy of nature. So a wrong person gives a chance to do that. I had just realized that there's certain kinds of things. I don't need to watch 40 minutes of, my mother is a slut kind of insult art. Jackson Pollock insult paintings. And I'm willing to put up with really a large amount of that for various reasons that I've considered. But, and probably ones I haven't figured out. But when I realize somebody can be more civil, but they're just doing that to show pain to their audience, who's a bunch of pain vampires, 90% of them. Certain ones obviously are not that, like Forever Wolf Films. She also seems attracted to this core of Gary that's good, and then the rhetoric that's brave, right? But I've figured out most of the people watching Gary are sadists that like watching his pain. And I don't like the fact that I'm helping to encourage Gary to continue in that, in getting himself irate just so that these people can watch him bleed. So that's why I'm not watching, I stopped the Gary stuff at a certain point. But hey, I'm 10 minutes in and he hasn't done that. Just being wrong or crazy about physics is not a bad thing. It kind of is. Okay. Let's see what else. Be kind. It's a very simple paradox I have thought about that makes everything should fall slower. First real video. Yeah, do that. Oh, hey, Hythloday was in here. Well, I didn't see. I got going, man. I was trying to. It's hard enough to listen and go check the chats and listen. I don't think I could juggle that. Okay. Thanks for watching, people that watched live and people in the future. I will likely be back and try to finish this video, but maybe not.